Hello, everyone. My name is Lane Preston. I'm the coordinator for furniture design and woodworking here at Anderson Ranch. Welcome to our summer faculty lecture series. First, I want to welcome our virtual participants watching tonight with our Board of Trustees and National Council. Thank you for your support. Tonight, we will be hearing from artists Daphne Arthur and Laura Kishimoto. As a note, Lino Puerta was supposed to speak this evening, but actually will be lecturing on Tuesday this week. So before we begin, please silence your cell phones. We don't want any alarms or ringers going off. So as for our land acknowledgement, Anderson Ranch acknowledges that our campus resides on the traditional ancestral territory of the Ute people who called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years. Through our mission to promote a wide range of arts and cultures and voices, we commit to partner with and honor the indigenous ancestors and residents of this sacred land where we learn, work, and create. So, first we have Daphne Arthur, who is an Afro-Venezuelan multidisciplinary artist who, using unconventional materials to transform the ephemeral into concrete, combining painting, sculpture, and drawing with smoke, paint, and clay, she explores history, language, and memory. Arthur teaches at Columbia University in New York, so everyone please help me in introducing Daphne Arthur.
Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing? Okay, so I'm just waiting for my computer to wake up. Yes. Okay. Okay. Let's go here. Okay, so I wanted to thank Liz and the team at Anderson Ranch for inviting me to be part of this amazing opportunity of community and creativity. And so the way that I developed this talk was kind of like thinking about a few bodies of work and seeing what are some overlapping things that I can share with you. And as I was doing that, I realized that there were three words that were resurfacing in my mind. It was adaptability, resilience, and community. And hopefully, throughout these three bodies of work, you'll be able to see that connection. The first one is titled Appearance of the Jewel Lotus. And this piece started with a dream. The dream was that I was hovering in over this dark ocean, and it was kind of moonlit. And as I was like looking into the ocean, I could see these orbs kind of emerging out to the surface. And as it kind of broke to the surface of the water, they kind of transformed, they became lotus flowers. And as they opened up, they were like these glowing orbs. And sometimes my work is either inspired by dreams or things that I'm reading. I try to be kind of very porous, meandering through life. So this allowed me to kind of become kind of fascinated with the symbolism of the lotus as a symbol of transformation. You know, it kind of like emerges from the muddy waters. It's almost like this quiet beauty that is born out of adversity. And also, I started to kind of find different stories or analogies that were kind of slowly building into ideas of what I wanted to make. The next symbolism that became really important was in ancient Egypt, the blue lotus is symbolic of the creation. So creation emerged out of the primordial waters. And so that, again, it kind of has an interesting resonance with this idea of resilience. But I find that my work is often like a kind of like a quiet teacher that slowly, very patiently, it teaches me how I should navigate through life. And if I'm open enough, I can really make interesting, it leads me to different interconnected themes that may merge different cultural traditions. So this piece was first exhibited in Aalto University in Finland. It's made out of 1,000 polymer clay flowers. And most of the flowers were inspired by flora that I saw in places that I've traveled from South America and from Venezuela, the Caribbean, parts of Europe, and India at that time. And so the first iteration of this piece, I wanted to kind of create something that felt accessible to the audience. I should preface by saying that I'm trained as a painter, right? But I do a lot of other things that is not just focus on two-dimensional surfaces. But the idea of this was to kind of create a piece where people can meander through and pick a flower. And the only thing would be like, once they pick a flower, I ask them if they're willing to share a small interview, their names, where they're from, and why they chose the flower. And that became really interesting because I kind of started to see the interconnection of community and engagement and storytelling. There was an interesting synchronicity of how we kind of build a sense of, there's a sense of affinity to the things we kind of gravitate to. And also, this piece was an interesting way of kind of letting go from being an artist who's kind of very practical about, like, I want this hung this way, or like not have too much interaction with the work. It kind of allowed for a different breath to take part of the work and transform it in ways that I wasn't expecting. So the second happening, I had like 300 flowers left, and I live in Far Rockaway in New York. So the second happening, I decided I'm just gonna do something at the beach, because part of this was also kind of figuring out what is different ways of making, I mentioned this before, making the work more accessible, but like having more of a democratic space for the work. And I thought that the beach is normally a place that people go for leisure, not necessarily art. And so I just wanted to kind of create this intervention. So I just kind of printed out this poster. Basically, it's like introducing the project, telling people, come to Beach 72, you can pick a flower, engage with this kind of, happening, and at the same time, link it with, at this time there was a lot of fires happening in Brazil. There was like deforestation, and so I wanted to bring awareness to that and sort of create a space where people can also have access to these organizations where they can contribute money to these fundraisers. So this was like the second version. And it became really interesting because similar to the first project, people would like pick a flower, put it down, like there's like a lot of indecisiveness, like what you want, what you don't want. But at the same time, it was interesting to see how I can trace back where the flowers end up ultimately. So there were people from Colombia, from Belgium, from France, originally from Finland, and sort of seeing how the piece is displaced, but also creating another variation of it, like the work wasn't static or within a state of inertia. And then after that work, as I was thinking about like these spaces of leisure, I started to want to come back to painting. And it's almost like I came back to painting with a different kind of intensity. I was focusing more on working from like outdoor spaces, but also kind of thinking about what it is to immerse yourself in like specific landscapes, and like there are certain themes like Shirinyoku, like forest bathing, or even thinking about Mono no Arawe, which is like ideas of experiencing beauty and decay at the same time. It's like you're looking at a flower, and at the same time you're seeing the ephemerality the flower. And so these works, these paintings were kind of created by using collage really as a format to generate a lot of the references. So again, similar to like the flowers, the photographs are coming from places that I've traveled. So this is a photo that I took in Oaxaca. I went to a cenote, but then I had a friend of mine pose in a different location. And then the way that I paint also reiterates this idea of collaging or fracturing time. So sometimes I would create these paint skins. Like I would put plastic on the floor and pour gesso and then paint those oil paintings. And sometimes those oil paintings are, you know, maybe I'm making a study of a Matisse painting or something that I really want to understand much better, but then have the flexibility of recycling the paint skin and collaging it into the painting. So for example, the tessellations here, those are all like collaged. And so that way it kind of gives me a flexibility of creating a painting that's more luminous and like also create kind of dissonance with color and tension. But as I'm doing this, I'm also thinking about, again, the relationship of the body with nature and like ideas of camouflage and mimicking. And I'm sort of thinking about Lacan talks about these things. And so it's like figuring out, if you think about camouflaging, we see that a lot in nature. It's like a performative act. It can be out of self-preservation, but also that within this performance, you can think about sort of becoming invisible in a way, and then finding your voice through that invisibility, almost like finding yourself through that transformation. A lot of the works too in this time period, I was very much fascinated with ancient Egypt culture. So this is called Neath, it's a self-portrait, but in this particular one, I'm sort of thinking about the visibility of Afro-Venezuelans. You often don't hear that they're Afro descendants in Venezuela. And so kind of pumping out more imagery that kind of sustains a little bit how I see myself in the world. So the Araguaney is the national flower. And again, a lot of the ways that I'm thinking is about collaging. So either collaging, identity is a form of collage. The dress that I'm wearing is a dress that my grandmother gave to my mom. It's actually a blue dress. I just changed the color so that it has this complementary relationship in the painting with the background. And again, sort of thinking about ways in which my paintings can have a conversation with other artists. I was quoting Stuart Davis, who was inspired by jazz. And there's two paintings where there's like this same symbol appears that kind of ate. It's called the rooftop painting and the Cime painting. That was like 1953. But I was interested in the 8 as this idea of infinity or the Ouroboros symbol, and sort of thinking about how influence and inspiration is sort of never ending. It's always kind of morphing and taking up a new form. This is another piece called A Pep. It's again a mashup of different things. So my studio is in Newark, New Jersey. And one day I was like walking to get food and I saw this guy with his pet snake. And I asked him if I can take a photo of him. And so for the painting, I just kind of changed his attire and also kind of reconstituted the landscape. So kind of making up some of this kind of tropical imagery with some photos that I took of Luxor. And again, just sort of thinking about nature as being from the city. It's almost like I see a little bit different to how we experience nature here. I feel like there's nature is something that kind of deals with the kind of economic access. Like, so who has access to nature? But at the same time, I think that there's a way that to consider access to nature as a civil right. It's almost like a space in which we can all kind of tap in and kind of grow and find a sense of identity through the interconnectedness that we have with our surroundings, and what does it mean when we don't have access to that. So a lot of these figures are just sort of like playing with these relationships. Here is just, I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking about the gaze. It's also set in Egypt, in the Hab. And specifically for this one, I think I was thinking about the Meninas by Velázquez, the triangulation of the gaze. So what does it mean to include the viewer in the picture plane and also exclude them from the action? I'm just adding some more images so you can see a little bit more of the textural things. So you can see some of the collage in the top. This one started off with going to the LACMA Museum, and I saw this really beautiful apothecary container. Not container, it's like a wooden vessel from the 12th century in Peru. And as soon as I saw it, there's something about the kind of Rococo, maximalist quality to it that made me think about Botticelli's Venus. And again, I wanted to kind of figure out, like, what's a way that I can, this is my mom. I use my mom a lot in my paintings. What is a way that I can think about representation of the female form and also kind of put it within the canon of painting and art history, but also kind of like do a remix or shift the narrative a little bit. So still thinking about the relationship with humans and their environment, and this kind of led me to the other extreme, the Natural History Museum, where it's like, I don't know, everything is dead. Here you can see too this idea of collaging. So the floor, those are all the paint skins. Here was kind of a little bit more inventive. It's kind of thinking about Goya's The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. You know, it's like the etching where the guy's like laying down, like half asleep. The intellectual is like sleeping. But anyway, so here I had my friend go into the museum, and I was just kind of following her around. I just loved the way she stood in front of this topaz. And it kind of created this entire fictionalized narrative in my head of her kind of coming into her own being, and at the same time, everything responding to that awareness. Some more painting. This is the last project. It's called Fragile Intangibilities. It's a recent project that I just completed, and it's made up of 11 tents made out of silk organza, and they're hand painted using ink, and there's some gutta, and also I utilized some of the same structure of the tent, like the grommets, to create gestural marks. But the premise of this was, so these projects sometimes take a really long time. The idea was like 2002, and I was looking at the news, seeing people at the border. There were like Haitian migrants and migrants from Central America, and they had their homes, demolished by homes, and they were kind of forced out, and their houses were, you know, discarded. And I was sort of thinking, as a migrant myself, like, what is home? So this project was really an investigation of what is home. And so I asked first-generation migrants, I would take them out to dinner a few times. It was kind of very like time-consuming, I think, for the participant, or involved. It was very involved because we'll have dinner a few times, depending on how much they would recount a particular story. That's what would get depicted on the tents. And also I wanted to create the tents out of silk because they're translucent, so they're kind of like mimicking the body to some degree. It's like a skin, but at the same time it's sort of like thinking about how we conjure up memories. Every time it's a little bit different, you know. Maybe you smell something and you remember your grandmother's cooking, or you remember something different, you know. So like the way that you're experiencing these pieces, the images is constantly fluctuating and shifting. The tents are suspended by the interviewee's hand. I made a mold of their hands. So it's almost like they're holding their story, but at the same time, as you're moving throughout the space, you're kind of shifting the air that breathes through the piece, and it kind of creates this very experience in the round. So yeah, there some of the tents I left empty because I wanted it to be like stories that are untold. What's another important point? My aunt made the tents. She sewed the tents. So that for me was important because I was thinking about labor as what like migrant labor often is caregiving. And she works as a caregiver, but also for me, like the activity or the action of her creating these by hand created a really beautiful poetics to kind of house these people's stories. This is, for example, Anastasia from North Macedonia. And for every tent, I took it in a way that I wanted the pieces to be very kind of monochromatic, so it was from blue to violets, because I felt like those were like colors that kind of, to me, is reminiscence of dreaming. But at the same time, for each tent, there was something like very unique. So a lot of the flora would be like the plants will be depicting maybe places that the person is from. So here we have like lilies, but there's also Congo peppers or, that you find in parts of Moruga and Trinidad. The one before, she was talking about her friend, her best friend grew up with her grandmother. And I was sort of thinking about what are some like grandmotherly things that you find in somebody's home, and like the crochet knitting thing was one of them. And so sometimes the work is kind of, makes me kind of think outside the box and like figure out different ways of creating storytelling through the materiality. And that is also a way of always kind of keeping the work a little bit fresh. It's like, oftentimes I don't know what I'm doing, and I think that's a really important thing for me. And yeah, I think that's about it. I just wanted these pieces to feel light, but still feel like weighed down by the hands and the chains that I used. And also because of the way that they were installed, you can walk in and through the pieces. So again, that kind of brings it back to the first piece that was very interactive. Here, this is a piece by Mika. And Mika is from Uganda. And this, the base of this is found in the Niero cave. And I started to see that there was a lot of connections between some of the recurring symbolisms. So there's a lot of labyrinthine, snake, like shapes, like a lot of circles and a lot of triangles that kept like emerging into the body of work. And here in the final piece, you can see how people can sort of interact with the piece. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Daphne. Next up, we have Laura Kishimoto, who is a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design. She creates sculptural furniture best characterized by its spatial complexity and its curiously organic form. Her work is featured in the permanent collections of the Denver Art Museum in Colorado and in the Mint Museum in North Carolina. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming Laura.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight, and thank you very much to Anderson Ranch for inviting me back to this incredible community. My name is Laura Kishimoto, and I am a designer and maker. My work falls somewhere between sculpture and furniture, distinguished by its spatial complexity, visually striking curves, and an almost complete disregard for functionality and comfort. While preparing this presentation, I was trying to work out exactly which aspects of my creative process define who I am as an artist. And one pivotal memory that I kept returning to was when I joined the origami club in my first week in high school. Up until then, I had only explored figurative art, both in my portfolio pieces and in paper folding. But at the first meeting, instead of folding paper cranes or flowers like I was expecting, we folded this parabolic design on the left, paper expression of the mathematical formula y equals x squared. And this was my first ever introduction to non-representational art. And I still remember how monumental that realization was, that I could create this beautiful form through abstraction of an idea and the repetition of a fold. On the right is another origami I regularly return to. It is a hexagonal tessellation, which just means a repeated pattern of hexagons. But before you complete and twist the paper into its final configuration, you must first patiently pre-fold a grid of 4,096 equilateral triangles. And I think in many ways, paper folding gave me the patience and precision that woodworking would later demand of me. Every piece of furniture and sculpture I've made has always started off with a paper model. I'll twist and fold strips of paper and then tape them together and then cut them apart and then hot glue them back together again. I take photos with my cell phone and then draw over the photos. I find that the moment I start to become too precious with the design marks the moment that the design begins to stagnate. When I first entered undergrad at Rhode Island School of Design in 2010, I got my first taste in working three-dimensionally and was instantly hooked. Being able to sketch lines in space and turn an object around in my hands to reveal new points of view opened up a whole new world for me. When designing a new piece, I'm looking for the moment when a 3D composition transcends its individual components and starts to look as if it has always existed. If I have too much control over each stage of the design, the result can often look overworked and contrived. But if I give some control over to the material, it will often result in beautiful surprises. The relationships that artists develop with their materials fascinate me. While I have explored other mediums such as steel and leather, woodworking remains deeply embedded in my identity as an artist. One of the founding principles of woodworking is understanding wood on a cellular level. Wood was never meant to be used by humans as a building material. It is a fibrous plant structure that transports water and nutrients up from the ground and sugars from photosynthesis down to its roots. When wood is processed into lumber, it continues to breathe and move with the ambient moisture in the air. It still thinks that it's a tree. And many woodworking techniques focus on accommodating or minimizing this cellular memory so that rectilinear stock will continue to remain flat and square. I specialize in a particular type of woodworking called bent lamination. Bent lamination is a technique which involves slicing wood into thin, flexible strips of veneer and then gluing those strips back together to make a curved form. To me, it's always seemed so intuitive to embrace the natural flexibility and curvature of wood and lean into what it's already trying to do, just twisting, bowing, cupping, crooking, as all those internal tensions are released. Another fascinating thing about bent lamination is that wood glue, aka polyvinyl acetate, sorry, that's only funny to me, mimics lignin, which is the substance that adheres the cellulose fibers of wood together. So when I suspend layers of veneer on interspersed layers of glue, I'm essentially recreating a solid piece of wood. I think the piece that is most representative of my identity as an artist is the Yumi chair. It was my first major foray into the world of bent lamination, and as I have grown as a designer and maker, it has become my most iterated and most successful piece. Of the 3 Yumi chairs that exist today, 2 live in the permanent collections of the Mint Museum in North Carolina and the Denver Art Museum in Colorado. When I originally designed the Yumi chair, I had no idea how to make it. While my professors had taught us how to make an extruded curve that bent along a single plane, I didn't know how to approach creating a curve that bent along 2 planes simultaneously. Since each bend of the Yumi chair scribed a unique compound curve, it wasn't feasible to make 24 individual molds. While I didn't know it at the time, the technique I was looking for was free-form bent lamination. Oops. One of my classmates suggested that I search for solutions in 3rd century Japanese bow making. The Japanese bow, also called the yumi, is the largest type of bow in the world and measures up to 96 inches in length. It is theorized that the asymmetry of its construction comes from using the bow while on horseback or kneeling. Most notably, the yumi bow is constructed from bent laminated bamboo. A craftsman would drive wedges into tightly bound layers of bamboo. The wedging action provides clamping pressure by tightening the hemp cord that binds the layers. And the deeper a wedge is driven, the more dramatically the bamboo begins to bend. The craftsman would bodily manipulate the lamination using his feet, knees, shoulders, and hands to freeform bend the distinctive yumi profile. No heavy clamps or labor-intensive molds necessary. Using cords and wedges, I originally recreated a rough approximation of the yumi bow process and began a now 14-year-long exploration of freeform bent lamination techniques. Over the years, I have reiterated the yumi chair several times to address the shortcomings of my earlier attempts. I transitioned from wedges and cord to using vacuum-sealed vinyl bags. Creating a vacuum effectively uses the atmospheric pressure as a clamp, which is around 14 pounds per square inch. And each pair of ribs is bent simultaneously to ensure that they are as symmetrical as possible. Do I aim it there? So this was the last iteration of the yumi chair. And I believe it had at one point 88 clamps on it at a time. So over the years, each iteration of the yumi chair has marked a significant benchmark in my career. The first chair became my first sale after graduating college and leaving my internship in Ireland. The second chair showed at the Sam Maloof Centennial in LA and Making a Seat at the Table all-women show in Philly. And the third chair marked my transition from rented communal shop space to my own shop, as well as my first sale to a museum. As my exploration in freeform lamination has expanded, I've become more engrossed in making the molds and scaffolding that support the freeform lamination through space. This is just a glue-up of one of my earlier pieces. So this glue-up involved 6 vacuum bags and an 8-hour working time. I don't think I'm aiming it at the right place. Oh, there it goes. So this was one of the final pieces. Another aspect in my life that has shaped my creative career enormously has been the support of my family. Most significantly, when I created this table, which is about 300 pounds and 10 feet wide, I bent each one of the legs, cantilevered 90 degrees over the other foot. And when I assembled the top, I realized I had created a giant spring. So this is the glue up of those legs. And after sitting down and crying for a while on the concrete floor, I called my dad up, and he flew out from Massachusetts to Colorado just to help me and be my sanding bitch and basically like support me throughout this really trying process. He has also flown out and helped me drive cross country to be able to make it to a show in time when I missed my freight deadline. So he has really shaped who I am as an artist, and I wouldn't be where I am today without him. Projects that I've been currently working on, a lot of other artists, when COVID happened, were really inspired by the forced isolation and the restricted materials. For me, because I was an instructor at a community college, a woodworking instructor, it was absolutely exhausting creating videos of all of my lectures and moving all of my content online. So basically, since COVID, I have started many projects and not successfully finished many projects. So I was just going to talk about some of the ongoing ones right now. So this was an earlier piece that I made, the vaulted stool, which was inspired by the Gothic barrel vaulted ceilings in cathedrals. And it actually is comfortable, which is the only piece of furniture I make that is comfortable. And it is suspended by a 3-way Danish cord weaving, and probably one of my more popular designs, but just due to the nature of freeform lamination, every time that I build a batch of them, I have to sort of treat it as a one-off project. So at the moment, I'm in the process of revising the original freeform mold and attempting to instead create a multi-part mold that will still retain the aesthetic of the freeform bend, but allow me to do some small batch production of this piece. Another project that I've been working on, a few years ago, I made this mirror, prototyped it originally out of pink foam, and stained it black with like a sort of satin finish, and personally found the grain patterns to be really distracting. So since then, I've been building a casting mold to be able to try to make fiberglass and epoxy resin versions of this piece and create a metallic finish that highlights that sort of spiraling curve that defines the piece. And this is my white whale project. I originally told the client that I would get it done in 4 months, and it's been 2 years now. So this is a nesting coffee table inspired by a Mobius strip. And I sort of forgot that gravity existed and that when you cut something that is held in tension, that it will just fall over backwards. So I've spent the last couple years developing a mold that will create this compound curved surface inspired by boat building techniques. And then also working on creating sculptural hardware that will relate those two laminations together and create like an organic transition between the two, but still provide enough structure. So that's everything that I've been working on.
Thank you, everybody. We are going to have a quick Q&A with Daphne and Laura. So if you have questions, raise your hand so I can walk over to you and hand you a microphone so that you can ask them.
Okay, I have a question for both, if that's okay. For Laura, if furniture is a prediction on how people might live, what kind of future are you designing for?
Could you say it one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. If furniture is a prediction of how people might live, what kind of furniture or what kind of future are you designing for?
Maybe a dystopian one. To me, I've always defended the lack of functionality in my furniture, and that ergonomics is only a really recent development in furniture. It used to be a symbol of power or a symbol of privilege. So I don't know what future I think it's pretty. And I think it's important to make pretty things.
Yeah, thank you. And then for Daphne, let's see, so sorry. Can you speak on your relationship with transformation, both in the body and the materials you work with?
Yeah, I think I would say having to do with unpredictability. I think in the body, I think oftentimes there's so much happening that you also don't have control over what's happening with the body. And I think kind of allowing a space of play and experimentation with material gives me the opportunity to kind of explore on those possibilities, the unseen.
Thank you. I have a question for both of you as well, separate questions. But for Laura, I admire you so much as a female woodworker. I think it's an amazing thing that you're doing woodworking in the society that we live in today. I'm curious, what inspires you as a woodworker and what got you into the craft?
Well, I tend to be most inspired by form. I really enjoy trying to create experiments with materials and let the sort of natural qualities and the natural tendencies of those materials surprise me and inspire me. The reason why I originally got into furniture was that I was looking for something that was somewhere between fine arts and design, because I wanted to be able to express myself, but I also wanted to be able to master a craft, and furniture very happily straddled that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. For Daphne, I want to say you're a beautiful storyteller, and with all of like the narratives and the pieces that you've made, I see so many connections. You talk about connections to nature and connections to different cultures, like Venezuelan culture and Afro-American culture and Egyptian culture. I'm wondering, what are some through lines of your work that are the most prevalent to you?
What's a through line? Well, I think you mentioned that storytelling, and I think kind of finding how through like oral traditions we record ways that we figure out how to exist. And so I think through different iterations in the work, it always starts with a story, but it also kind of is hearkening back to symbols. And I think that landscape gives us the language of metaphor. So I think metaphor is the through line.
These are hard questions.
I have a question for both of y'all. Sorry, I'm going to be selfish and ask one. So for Laura, how do you use light in complement to the forms that you're creating? And for Daphne, how do you use light in complement to the metaphors that you are trying to communicate?
For me, one of my favorite things about working three-dimensionally is that light almost becomes another material that you're working and shaping. And considering how your piece is going to exist in all different forms of light, natural light, gallery light, or even just in the dark, and like how it stands on its own as a piece with all of those conditions. Does that answer it?
So I originally was trained as a musician, and I make a connection between light and sound. So like light frequencies, what sounds they might produce, and then that then makes me think about what's the feeling that the painting or whatever material that I'm using. So that's one of the ways that I would use light. But for the last project, the Fragile Intangibilities, it was interesting because the material was so, it was so different than working on canvas. Like if I light it too much, you can't see the drawing. So it needed to exist in a dim, almost shadow in order to be seen. And that was kind of like a different way of thinking of visibility, but through the shadows. So that's a new thing for me.
Thank you. Do we have one? Oh, lovely.
Sorry. This is for Laura. I was just curious, would you ever see yourself as a sculptor? Because I think it's interesting that you make furniture that is not comfortable. So, and it seems your work is sculpture, really. And so I wonder how you differentiate between furniture and sculpture, or if that's important to you at all. And would you make something that is completely non-functional and has no reason to be functional?
Yeah, I definitely have a very complicated relationship with functionality. To me, sculpture is very intimidating in that you could make anything out of anything. And the fact that furniture has sort of universally recognized archetypes, like everyone knows what a chair looks like, everyone knows what a table looks like. Using that as a point of inspiration, to me, makes the piece a little bit more accessible because people already have sort of emotional narratives tied to the furniture that's in their own lives. I have made a few purely sculptural pieces before, and I think just the lack of restriction didn't force me to push it as hard as I should have, so they were a little underdeveloped.
We have time for one more question. Oh, lovely.
Hi, Laura. Mine's really specific. I just wanted to know about your Sistine Chapel arches. There's so much abstraction that you're working with, but that's really specific. And I was wondering where that comes from.
Like that specific form of inspiration.
Yeah, exactly.
When I designed it at the time, I was reading Pillars of the Earth, which is a series about a cathedral building and how you make a building that makes people believe in God. And so at the time, I was going around to cathedrals and looking at them and just really fascinated by how all the other buildings built in that time period were just like squat rectangles, and the cathedrals really defied physics and were where sort of like the forefront of innovation was.
Everyone, let's say thank you to Laura and Daphne one more time.